example.
Yeah. So a couple things to start out with. One is that I often in a boardroom will ask to clarify, is this a decision topic or a discussion topic? Because for starters, I want to understand, are we actually making a decision as a board? Sometimes that's because we are required as a board, right, as fiduciaries to sign off on something. Sometimes that's because the CEO will say, hey, I'm not comfortable making this decision on my own. I would like this to be a group decision. But it's important to clarify that, right? Because sometimes you get into a discussion and or into a discussion at a board level, and you think, or certain board members think that they're there to make the decision, but actually the CEO is just looking for input. And I think that's really important. So I start with that. The other thing I always start with is I have a very important mantra, which is don't panic, gather information, make an informed decision. And the order matters. And I see all over the place people mixing up the order, right? Or panicking, right? To start out with. And I think it's really important. There are emergent situations that come up occasionally in venture, not as many as I think people think. But I always follow that mantra, first principles. Like, let's not panic, can't make decisions based on emotion. There's almost always a need to get a little bit of information. And, that can vary, right? Hey, if we need to make this decision today, then okay, well, we can get the information we can get. But I'm rarely on a call where we need to make a decision this second and we don't have a moment to step back and get data. And then you use the data to make an informed decision. So for me, that framework is really, really important. And as part of that, I often try to clarify, hey, when do we need to make this decision by, right? Because I think sometimes people are apt to put artificial deadlines in front of them. And it's not that I want to take time that is an inordinate amount of time, but I want to have time typically to gather information. I also feel those are the most important things. That's how you approach a decision. I also think it's really important to listen a lot. I rarely, when someone asks me my opinion, I will rarely just sort of spout it back to them, right? I almost always will ask for a second. Sometimes it's just, and I'll say that sometimes. My CEOs I work with get used to this. It's kind of a funny tick of mine, but where someone will ask me something and I'll say, give me a second. I just need a minute of silence just to think about this for a second. I'm going to give you an answer, but I need a second to just test it in my head. I like that. And I like running through that. I also like to be really clear about what the framework looks like. And I almost always lead with that, again, because I feel like my role is rarely to be the person making the decision. And so oftentimes I'll walk up to that decision with a CEO, but what I'm really doing is saying, this is how I would look at the framework of that. Let's talk about some of the pieces that might influence that and make sure that we're on the same page about it. And then they end up coming to the conclusion that's the right conclusion without me having to say it. Because I want them to feel like they have that agency, because they run these businesses. So oftentimes we'll start with that framework. I will almost always sort of list out my assumptions. Here's how I'm thinking about this framework. Here's sort of what's influencing my view. You've asked me for my opinion, and I'm going to give it to you, but here's what's influencing in that. And then I'll give them the opinion. And then I'll also typically tell them how strongly I feel about that. Right. And I think that's also really important. I have a style of speaking. My partners joke with me about this, that I sound very definitive about things that I often am not particularly definitive about. And I think that's just, I don't know, I'm loud, I talk fast, or whatever it is. And so I typically have learned this to clarify with people, hey, you've asked me my opinion. We've gone through the framework. I've given you sort of my assumptions. Here's my actual opinion. And just to be clear, I'm a 62%, right? That's probably more accurate than it typically is. But I feel I'm 90%. Like I feel this pretty strongly. Or hey, I'm like kind of 50-50, right? Like I this is probably what I do, but I don't feel super strongly about it. And you may have more data than I have, which is why I've just told you what the framework and the sort of the assumptions were. All of those things I think are important. Again, Barack, I'm not in a decision business. I'm in the influence business. And so I think it's really important to be clear about sort of what's behind your opinions on things. I also think that makes your opinions more likely to be adopted as well when it matters. But the other thing that I think that if I were just to give myself kudos, if that's okay, I think others would say this is I think I'm really good at letting go of something, even even when I believed in it pretty strongly. Like I'm when I'm just convinced that I was wrong, or it's clear that that's just not the decision we're going to make, then you really need to learn to let that go. And I think that's something that boards often do wrong. Someone will have a very strong opinion about something, and they just can't let it go, right? And it comes up meeting after meeting after meeting, and it's like, look, we made this decision, and now it's done, and it's behind us. And I think that that's a really important. It's taken me some time to learn that skill. I'm a pretty stubborn person, and so it's not always in my nature to be like, okay, I felt strongly about this, but we're going in a different direction, and I agree. Or, hey, I felt strongly about this, but now I have some new data, and I'm giving it up. But I think it's really important to have that flexibility. Sometimes people describe that as strong opinions loosely held. It's taken my partners, I think, a little bit of time to get used to that as well, because I will often stress test something by taking the other side, which I totally don't agree with, but it helps me process through something. And it's taken them a minute to realize sometimes, and sometimes now I'll raise my hand and say, hey, I'm just steel manning this for a second. So, how about if we take the other side, and this is what that looks like to me? And now they're sort of used to it. And now we kind of debate it. And I almost debate myself sometimes. And then they come back and like, yeah, I know that was a stupid framework to think about it. That what we're talking about, I agree.